van de Mulder from Belgium, and I'm currently working as an advisor and team manager for OVAM. And OVAM is the public waste agency of Flanders, situated in Belgium. And OVAM develops policies on waste, materials and soil towards a circular economy. Yeah, Belgium has no natural deposits of asbestos minerals itself, so all asbestos, raw asbestos, was imported since the emergence of the Belgian asbestos industry already in the late 19th century, and the first important industrial use in Belgium was after the First World War. Actually, the United States then became a prime outlet for Belgian asbestos cement products, but owing to the economic turmoil during the Great Depression, the Belgian asbestos industry turned into its domestic market, and it began further differentiation of several types of asbestos cement products. Of course, the Second World War made manufacturing grind to a halt. But after the war, asbestos use increased steeply, and there were about 22 different asbestos manufacturing sites in Belgium. And 15 of them were situated in Flanders, so in the Flemish region. And during the 60s, Belgium had one of the highest raw asbestos consumptions levels per capita in the world. In total, the estimation is that we imported about 2.2 million tons of raw asbestos in total in Belgium. The use of asbestos was forbidden in 2001, but there's still the presence of asbestos in building infrastructure. It's very abundant. And for the Flemish region, best guess, it's really a guess, best estimation is 2.3 million tons of asbestos containing materials still present inside, outside buildings, infrastructures, roads. For the whole of Belgium, the best guess is an estimation of about 5.5 million tons. Yeah, some regulation is national and environmental regulation is for the regions. So occupational exposure is a national competence and it's embedded in a national legislation. And this legislation, in a nutshell, it contains several employer obligations to avoid workers' exposure. And this legislation includes a mandatory asbestos inventory and an asbestos management program. And it defines also 3 different techniques for asbestos removals with respective training requirements for the workers from an initial 8 to 32-hour training and annually an 8-hour training. And then there's also for asbestos removal or prior to asbestos removal mandatory notification to the authorities. There are, of course, occupational exposure limits, and there's a certification of laboratories analyzing asbestos in materials and conducting air measurements. But there's no certification on a national level for asbestos experts or for asbestos inventories. Private exposure, just citizen exposure, everybody, worker, non-worker, and environmental exposure is regulated in the regional environmental legislation. So also for the Flemish government, there are some big changes over the last years, and in 2018 they approved a regional asbestos removal plan. And this plan strives for an asbestos-safe Flanders by 2040. But this plan is really ambitious because it includes the accelerated phasing out of the most riskiest asbestos application by 2034 already. And this accounts for more than 85% of the volume of asbestos material still present inside and outside buildings and infrastructure. So all asbestos cement in the outer shell of buildings, all friable asbestos applications if they are easily accessible.
Okay.
So, and then the milestone 2040 is actually the milestone where we want every asbestos application in poor condition to be removed.
Okay.
And to monitor this policy, next year we will introduce a compulsory asbestos inventory upon sale of every building constructed before 2001 needs to possess such an asbestos inventory upon sale, and also by the milestone 2032. And differently from the national situation, we introduce certification systems for experts conducting this asbestos inventories. And we also introduce a mobile-friendly software application which the asbestos experts can use to register their inventory data real time in the field during the actual inspection on site. Yeah, for workers, the occupational exposure limit is 0.1 fibers per cubic centimeters, measured on an 8-hour basis. And there's also, on the regional level, in the environmental legislation, we have a long-term exposure limit, and it is 0.005 fibers per cubic centimeters as an annual average. Yeah, for the identification of asbestos in materials, it is a national certification system, and the standard is PLM. PLM as a standard to identify asbestos in materials, and TEM is a standard for the quantification of air samples. So currently, there's only defected in case of an employer-employee situation in a building, an annual actualization of the asbestos inventory and the management program is mandatory. And in case of the removal of asbestos by workers, prior asbestos inventory is also necessary, and the notification to the supervisory authority is also necessary. In case of asbestos removal by private individuals, there are no mandatory steps for the moment. Yeah. When a Flemish situation, removal will be mandatory as soon as a material is in bad and poor condition, and it will be the mandatory asbestos inventory that will indicate which materials are in poor condition and need to be removed. It will be evaluated based on a risk assessment model, but the basis is indeed visual, and also and there are some parameters included, the initial, the kind of binding matrix, a strong one or a weak one, or even the absence of a binding matrix, the type of asbestos fibers taken into account, the situation of the material itself. Is it closed? Is it enclosed in other materials, or is it free to in air, outside air, or inside air? And then finally, what is the condition of the binding material? Is it already weathered? Is it very old? Is it damaged? And all those parameters are taken into account to evaluate the material risk. And besides this material risk, you also have an actual exposure risk. All asbestos waste, like many other countries, I think for the moment, is landfilled. And also one of the former asbestos cement manufacturers currently manufacturing fiber cement, but previously, before the ban, they produced asbestos cement, and they still operate a landfill for landfilling asbestos cement waste. And historically, this landfill was situated in a residential area. And as the public awareness for asbestos risk increased in the past years, and the residents started complaining about the lack of risk management, and not enough measures were taken to avoid exposure to the environment, in their view and their opinion. So residents and the local political parties started campaigns and used hidden cameras to register the poor management of the landfill site. And finally, the regional authorities, they withdraw the exploitation permit. think that our current regional asbestos removal plan of Flanders, and we see some first steps of similar plans in the Walloon and Brussels regions, inspired by our initiative. I think those plans are quite unique. It combines actually new legislation towards an accelerated inventory and a central database, and the accelerated removal of asbestos combined with nudging and financing instruments to stimulate building owners, not only mandatory but also triggered by stimulation. And for Flanders, this asbestos removal strategy on a policy level is integrated in an overall win-win renovation strategy to realize energy neutral buildings and asbestos safe buildings by 2040 and 2050. In Belgium, I think on a global scale, I think we see that the world is moving at two different speeds. Regions like Europe, who banned the use of asbestos, are now focusing on tackling asbestos risks due to the presence of asbestos in building and weathering and aging. Several studies indicated that it causes increased exposure risk just by being present inside or outside buildings. And also the presence of asbestos complicates the safe use of buildings and means an investment threshold for building owners to conduct a renovation or to stimulate energy performance of a building. So in a circular economy, which is a very important strategy for Europe, also for Belgium, asbestos-free buildings or demolition debris is essential and necessary to bring buildings and materials in a circular use. But we see many other countries, especially emerging economies, who are still focusing on achieving prosperity and catching up with our prosperity level we have in the Western countries. So health and environmental issues are mostly a luxury, and it's currently subordinated to build new infrastructure as a primary focus in those emerging economies. In our Flemish legacy policy project and in our own experience, I think that the insights we gain now for see what is the trigger to stimulate a building owner to tackle asbestos problems and to remove asbestos or to initiate a safe management. I think the insights of behavioral science have a great but currently underestimated potential to develop and achieve asbestos policies towards workers and citizens. I think it can be a key element for success.